June 4, 1942. 3 American dive bombers spot 4 massive Japanese aircraft carriers. In the next 5 minutes, they're about to change the entire course of World War II. But here's what nobody tells you about the Battle of Midway. America shouldn't have won this fight. Not even close. The US Navy was outnumbered, outgunned, and using broken equipment. Japan had the biggest, most experienced naval force on the planet. Their pilots had been fighting for years, while American pilots barely had flight training. Intelligence said the Japanese fleet was heading to Midway Island with 4 carriers, battleships, cruisers, and over 250 aircraft. America had 3 carriers, one of them so badly damaged it should have been in dry dock for months. Military experts today still can't fully explain how America pulled this off, but I spent weeks digging through battle reports, pilot journals, and decoded Japanese messages to figure out exactly what happened in those 4 days. And trust me, this story is way crazier than any movie could show you. Let's go back 6 months before Midway. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor. Japan attacked the US Pacific Fleet and destroyed or damaged 8 battleships. It was supposed to be a knockout blow. Japan's plan was simple: wreck America's navy so badly that the US would have no choice but to negotiate peace and let Japan keep conquering Asia. And honestly, it almost worked. After Pearl Harbor, America's Pacific Fleet was in shambles. The USS Arizona was at the bottom of the harbor. The USS Oklahoma had capsized. The USS California, West Virginia, and Nevada were all sunk or heavily damaged. Over 2,400 Americans died that day. It was the worst naval disaster in US history. But Japan made one critical mistake at Pearl Harbor. They didn't destroy the aircraft carriers. All 3 Pacific carriers were out at sea that day. The USS Enterprise, USS Lexington, and USS Saratoga survived. And in 1942, carriers were becoming the new kings of naval warfare. Still, 3 carriers against Japan's entire combined fleet? Those odds were terrible. By early 1942, Japan was dominating the Pacific. They'd taken the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, the Dutch East Indies, and were pushing toward Australia. Their navy hadn't lost a single major battle. Their carrier pilots were the best in the world. Many had been flying combat missions in China since 1937. These guys could land a plane on a carrier in rough seas, at night with no lights. American pilots were struggling to land in perfect weather. Japan's carriers were incredible machines. The Akagi and Kaga were massive. They could each carry over 70 aircraft. The Soryu and Hiryu were newer, faster, and packed with experienced crews. Together, these 4 carriers had about 250 planes: Zeros, Val dive bombers, and Kate torpedo bombers, all battle-tested. America's response? 3 carriers: Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown. And here's the thing about Yorktown: it should never have been at Midway at all. 2 weeks before the battle, Yorktown had been in the Coral Sea fighting Japan. A Japanese dive bomber put a 550-pound bomb right through the flight deck. The explosion tore through 3 decks below. Navy estimates said it would take 3 months to fix at Pearl Harbor's dry docks. Admiral Nimitz, commander of the Pacific Fleet, told them they had 3 days. Think about that. 3 months of repairs in 3 days. The repair crews at Pearl Harbor worked around the clock, welding, patching, replacing entire sections of the ship. They didn't even finish. When Yorktown left for Midway, repair crews were still on board, fixing things during the voyage. The ship was basically held together with duct tape and prayers. So that's America's situation going into June 1942. 3 carriers, 1 barely floating, pilots with minimal experience, equipment that kept breaking down, torpedoes that barely worked, and we'll get to that disaster later. Japan had 4 fleet carriers, battleships for backup, and pilots who'd been sinking ships for years. Plus, Japan had one more advantage. They thought this was going to be a surprise attack. They had no idea America knew they were coming. But America did know, and that's where this story gets really interesting. Station Hypo, Pearl Harbor, a basement office filled with codebreakers, linguists, and mathematicians. Led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, a guy who looked more like a college professor than a military officer. He usually worked in a bathrobe because the basement was freezing, and he basically lived there, trying to crack Japanese naval codes. Japanese naval communications used a code called JN25. It was incredibly complex, thousands of code groups changing constantly. Rochefort's team had been working on it since before Pearl Harbor, making slow progress. But in May 1942, they started picking up something big. Lots of Japanese radio traffic about an operation at a place called AF, major fleet movements, carriers, battleships, invasion forces. But where was AF? Rochefort was convinced AF meant Midway Island, a tiny atoll about 1,300 miles northwest of Hawaii. Midway had a small marine garrison and an airfield. Not much to look at, but strategically it was huge. If Japan took Midway, they'd have a base to threaten Hawaii. They could force the US Pacific Fleet into a decisive battle and destroy it. But Rochefort had a problem. His bosses in Washington, D.C. weren't convinced. They thought AF might be the Aleutian Islands off Alaska, or maybe even Hawaii itself. And if they guessed wrong about where Japan was attacking, the entire Pacific Fleet could be in the wrong place when the shooting started. So Rochefort came up with a brilliant plan. He had Midway send a fake radio message, in the clear, not coded, saying their water distillation plant broke down and they were short on fresh water. Then Rochefort waited. 2 days later, Japanese intelligence sent a coded message. AF is short on fresh water. Boom. AF was definitely Midway. Rochefort now knew not just where Japan was attacking, but when, early June, and roughly how many ships they were sending. This intelligence gave Admiral Nimitz an incredible advantage. Japan thought they were launching a surprise attack. Instead, they were sailing right into an ambush. But knowing Japan's plan and actually stopping them were two very different things. Nimitz had decisions to make, fast. He called back all 3 carriers. Enterprise and Hornet raced back from the South Pacific. Yorktown limped back from Coral Sea for those emergency repairs. Nimitz scraped together every available ship, cruisers, destroyers, submarines. He also reinforced Midway Island itself with every plane that could fly. Marine fighters, Army B-17 bombers, Navy patrol planes. Midway's garrison went from a couple of dozen planes to over 100, but Nimitz knew the carriers would be the key. Carriers had to fight this battle because America's battleships were still wrecked from Pearl Harbor. The only battleship available was USS Colorado, and she was on the west coast getting maintenance, so it was carriers or nothing. Nimitz put Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher in overall command. Fletcher was on Yorktown. He'd been at Coral Sea and had some experience with carrier battles, more than most American admirals at that point. Under Fletcher was Admiral Raymond Spruance, commanding Enterprise and Hornet. Spruance was interesting. He wasn't even a carrier guy. He was a cruiser commander who'd studied carriers, but never led them in battle. He got the job because Admiral Halsey, who normally commanded those carriers, was in the hospital with a skin condition. Halsey recommended Spruance, calling him one of the best tactical minds in the Navy. So you've got Fletcher with the damaged Yorktown and Spruance, a cruiser guy, with 2 carriers he'd barely worked with. Against Japan's best carrier commanders and most experienced pilots, what could go wrong? Everything, as it turned out, but also nothing. This battle was about to become the most chaotic, confused, lucky and unlucky 4 days in naval history. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto was Japan's naval genius. He'd planned Pearl Harbor. He understood carriers better than almost anyone. And he knew Japan had a problem. America's industrial power, If the war dragged on, America would build more ships, more planes, more everything. Japan had to win quickly. Yamamoto's plan for Midway was complex, maybe too complex. He split his forces into multiple groups spread across hundreds of miles of ocean. There was a northern force attacking the Aleutian Islands as a distraction, a transport group with troops to invade Midway. The carrier strike force under Admiral Nagumo, the same guy who'd hit Pearl Harbor with those 4 big carriers, and Yamamoto himself in the battleship Yamato with the main battle fleet staying back as reserves. Why split up? Yamamoto wanted to do 2 things at once. 1. Take Midway Island. 2. Lure out the US carriers and destroy them. He figured after losing at Coral Sea a few weeks earlier, America only had 2 carriers left. Yorktown was supposedly out of action for months. Japan had 4 carriers plus battleship support. Easy victory, right? But that split force was going to cause problems. Japanese ships were spread so far apart they couldn't support each other. And Yamamoto's battleships, including his flagship with the most powerful radio equipment, were 300 miles behind the carriers. This meant Admiral Nagumo on carrier Akagi was basically on his own once fighting started. Nagumo's orders were to hit Midway with airstrikes, soften up the defenses for the invasion. Then when American carriers showed up, if they showed up, he'd switch targets and sink them. Simple plan. Attack the island, wait for American ships, destroy them. But Nagumo had concerns. He didn't like being this far from battleship support. His patrol planes were having mechanical issues, and intelligence kept saying American carriers weren't in the area. They were supposedly down near the Solomon Islands, over 2,000 miles away. Nagumo's staff assured him there was no way American carriers could reach Midway in time. They were completely wrong. Enterprise, Hornet, and the supposedly crippled Yorktown were already there, hiding northeast of Midway, waiting. June 3rd. Japanese transport ships were spotted by American patrol planes about 600 miles west of Midway. The battle was about to start. Midway's garrison went on high alert. Pilots slept by their planes. Marines manned anti-aircraft guns. Everyone knew what was coming. The Japanese carrier force was closing in. 4 carriers in a box formation, Akagi and Kaga in front, Soryu and Hiryu behind, surrounded by battleships, cruisers and destroyers. Over 250 aircraft ready to launch. The crews were confident. They'd done this before. Pearl Harbor, Darwin, Ceylon, Coral Sea. Japanese carrier pilots called themselves the First Carrier Strike Force and believed they were unbeatable. At 4:30 a.m. on June the 4th, Nagumo launched the first wave toward Midway. 108 planes, 36 Zeros, 36 Valdive bombers, 36 Kate-level bombers. Their job was to wreck Midway's airfield and defenses. But while those planes were flying toward Midway, American patrol planes found the Japanese carriers. A PBY Catalina scout plane spotted them through the clouds and radioed back to Midway. Enemy carriers. On Yorktown, Enterprise, and Hornet, alarm bells rang. Pilots sprinted to their planes. This was it. The carriers turned into the wind to launch aircraft. But there was a problem. The Japanese carriers were about 200 miles away, right at the edge of American strike range. If American planes flew out there, hit the Japanese ships and flew back, most wouldn't have enough fuel to make it. They'd have to ditch in the ocean. Admiral Spruance made the call. Launch everything. Every dive bomber, every torpedo bomber, every fighter they could get in the air. Midway-based planes were already taking off to hit the Japanese carriers too. B-17s, Marine dive bombers, Army B-26 carrying torpedoes. This was going to be messy. Multiple groups of planes from different bases attacking the same targets. No coordination, everyone flying at different speeds and altitudes. Recipe for disaster. But sometimes disasters work in your favor. While American planes were launching, the Japanese strike on Midway was hitting the island hard. Zero shot down Marine fighters. Val dive bombers blew up fuel tanks and buildings, but Midway's runways stayed operational. The Japanese didn't hit them enough, and Midway's anti-aircraft fire was intense. Japanese planes were getting hit, pilots killed. The strike leader radioed back to Nagumo. There is need for a second attack. Now Nagumo had a decision. His doctrine said, keep half your planes ready to hit enemy ships, just in case carriers showed up. He had 93 planes on his carriers, armed with torpedoes and armor-piercing bombs, perfect for sinking ships. But Midway needed another strike, and his scouts hadn't seen any American carriers. Intelligence said they weren't even in the area. At 7:15 a.m., Nagumo made the call, rearm the reserve planes with land bombs and send them to hit Midway again. This meant bringing 93 planes down to the hangar decks, swapping out torpedoes for bombs, a process that took 45 minutes. Deck crews started working, torpedoes got unloaded, high explosive bombs got loaded. It was organized chaos. Then at 7:28 a.m., one of Nagumo's scout planes, a float plane that had launched late due to mechanical problems, sent a message. Sight what appears to be 10 enemy surface ships. Nagumo's blood pressure probably spiked. American ships? Where? What kind? He sent back, ascertain ship types and maintain contact. That scout plane was having radio trouble and couldn't answer right away. Minutes ticked by. Nagumo's staff was freaking out. Were those carriers, cruisers, supply ships? Meanwhile, American planes from Midway were attacking. 6 Navy TBF Avenger torpedo bombers came in low, skimming the waves. Zeros swarmed them. 5 Avengers got shot down. The one torpedo that hit Akagi's hull, dud, didn't explode. Then 4 Army B-26 bombers came in, also carrying torpedoes. Army bombers doing Navy torpedo runs because Midway needed every plane to attack. Zero shot down 2. The other 2 dropped torpedoes, both missed. 1 damaged B-26, engine smoking, flew straight at Akagi's bridge in a possible suicide run. It crashed into the ocean just off the bow. Close call. Then Marine dive bombers attacked. Then Army B-17s from 20,000 feet. None of them hit anything. Japanese carriers dodged bombs, swatted down planes. Zero fighters were dominating, but these attacks were forcing Nagumo's carriers to maneuver, breaking their formation, making it impossible to land the returning Midway strike group that was now running low on fuel, and Nagumo still didn't know if there were American carriers out there. At 7:45 a.m., the scout plane finally sent another message. Enemy ships are 5 cruisers and 5 destroyers, no carriers. Nagumo relaxed a bit. Cruisers weren't a major threat to carriers. He could deal with them after the second Midway strike. But 8 minutes later, another message. Enemy force accompanied by what appears to be a carrier. Carrier, American carrier, right there, about 200 miles away. Nagumo's dilemma just got worse. He had planes rearmed with land bombs in the hangars. His first Midway strike group was circling overhead, low on fuel, needing to land. And now there's an American carrier that needs to be attacked immediately. What do? Land your returning planes first, which takes 45 minutes, and you can't launch attacks during that time. Or launch an immediate strike with whatever you have ready. Nagumo talked with his staff. Rear Admiral Yamaguchi on carrier Hiryu sent a message. Consider it advisable to launch attack force immediately. But Nagumo's chief of staff disagreed. They needed a proper strike. Lots of planes coordinated with 0 escorts, not a rushed hodgepodge. And those returning pilots had fought hard over Midway. They deserved to land safely. At 7:45 a.m., Nagumo ordered all planes to be rearmed with ship attack weapons again, torpedoes back on, armor-piercing bombs. The whole process reversed. Hangar deck crews started the swap all over again, now working even faster. Meanwhile, land the Midway strike group, get them down, refuel them, rearm them, then launch a massive proper attack on that American carrier with everything. It was the correct decision by Japanese naval doctrine, except American torpedo bombers were about to arrive, and they were going to attack right when Nagumo's carriers were at their most vulnerable. Flight decks full of planes, hangars full of bombs and torpedoes, fuel lines open. Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8, VT-8, reached the Japanese carriers first. 15 TBD Devastator torpedo bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander John Waldron. They'd gotten separated from their dive bombers and fighters due to navigation errors and communication problems. Waldron didn't care. He saw those 4 Japanese carriers below and took his squadron down. No fighter escort. 15 slow, obsolete torpedo bombers against Japanese carriers protected by over 50 Zeros. Waldron's planes dropped to 150 feet above the water, spread into attack formation, throttles full. Japanese Zeros dove on them like wolves. Machine gun fire ripped through the Devastators. One by one, American planes started exploding, crashing into the ocean. Waldron's plane got hit. Engine on fire. He kept flying, got hit again, crashed, killed. The other 14 planes pressed the attack. Zeros shot them down, one after another. Within 6 minutes, all 15 planes from VT-8 were destroyed. Only one pilot survived, Ensign George Gay. His plane got shot down right before torpedo release. Gay inflated his life raft, hid under it, and watched the rest of the battle from the water. 15 planes, 0 hits. Every torpedo either missed or malfunctioned. American torpedoes in 1942 were garbage. They ran too deep or didn't explode. The Mark 13 torpedo was so bad, pilots called them swimming pigs. But VT-8's attack did something important. It pulled Japanese Zeros down to sea level. The carriers had to keep maneuvering, couldn't recover aircraft, and more American torpedo bombers were coming. Enterprise's VT-6 attacked next. 14 Devastators. Then Yorktown's VT-3 with 12 planes. Same story. Zeros shot them down in droves. Only a handful of pilots survived. Out of 41 torpedo bombers from all 3 carriers, only 6 made it back. And still, no torpedo hits. It looked like a disaster. Japan was winning. American attacks were failing. Zeros ruled the sky. Japanese carriers were still operational, still dangerous. But those torpedo attacks had done something crucial. Every Zero was down at sea level, chasing torpedo bombers. Japanese carriers were scattered across miles of ocean, maneuvering wildly. Combat air patrol was completely focused on the torpedo threat coming in low. Nobody was watching for dive bombers coming from high altitude. 10:22 a.m., June 4th, 1942. Lieutenant Commander Wade McCluskey led Enterprise's dive bomber squadron, VBD-6, with 33 Dauntless dive bombers. They'd been searching for the Japanese carriers for over an hour, fuel running low. McCluskey had flown to where intelligence said the carriers would be. Nothing there. Ocean looked empty. Most commanders would have turned back. McCluskey kept searching. He noticed a Japanese destroyer below, moving fast. Destroyers don't speed around randomly. They're usually escorting something important. McCluskey followed its wake. At 10:20 a.m., through a gap in the clouds, McCluskey spotted them. 4 Japanese carriers in a formation turning into the wind. Flight decks covered with planes being spotted for launch. Perfect targets. McCluskey didn't know it, but Yorktown's dive bombers were approaching from a different angle at the exact same time. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie with 17 more Dauntlesses. 2 American squadrons about to hit the Japanese carriers simultaneously, completely by accident. Japanese lookouts spotted them too late. Enemy dive bombers. Zeros tried climbing to intercept, but they were too low, too slow, out of position from chasing torpedo bombers. McCluskey split his formation. Attack 2 carriers. He took half his planes after Akagi, Nagumo's flagship. His wingman targeted Kaga, the other large carrier. Leslie's Yorktown group went after Soryu. In those next 5 minutes, the entire Pacific War changed. Dive bombers pushed over at 14,000 feet, angling down at 70 degrees, screaming toward the carriers at 250 knots. Pilots fought vibrations, tunnel vision from G-forces, anti-aircraft fire bursting around them. They had to get close, 2,000 feet or less, for accuracy. At Akagi, the first bomb missed, second bomb missed, third bomb direct hit. A 1,000-pound bomb went through the flight deck near the rear elevator. It exploded in the upper hangar. Remember those planes being rearmed? Torpedoes, bombs, open fuel lines. That one bomb started a chain reaction. Aviation fuel ignited, bombs cooked off, torpedoes exploded. Fire ripped through Akagi's hangar, spreading to the flight deck, the second hangar. Planes loaded with fuel and ordnance started exploding like fireworks. 2 more bombs hit Akagi. One blew apart the flight deck's center line. Another penetrated to the engineering spaces. The entire ship was burning from inside. Admiral Nagumo stood on the bridge, watching his flagship die. Staff officers pulled him away. The bridge was filling with smoke. They evacuated to a cruiser. At the same time, 3 bombs slammed into Kaga. Same result: raging fires, exploding ordnance, flight deck wrecked. Kaga had been preparing to launch 30 planes. All those aircraft turned into bombs themselves when fire reached them. Yorktown's dive bombers hit Soryu with 3 bombs. The first bomb blew a hole in the flight deck and started fires below. Second and third bombs devastated the hangar spaces. Soryu's damage control teams tried fighting the fires, but explosions kept getting bigger. Within 20 minutes, the captain ordered abandon ship. 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, destroyed in 5 minutes. 3 carriers that had attacked Pearl Harbor that had never been stopped. Gone. The 4th carrier, Hiryu, was north of the others and escaped the initial attack. She immediately prepared a counter-strike. This battle wasn't over, but first, let's appreciate what just happened. American dive bomber pilots, most of them in combat for the first time, just executed one of the most precise, devastating attacks in naval history. 3 carriers burning, hundreds of Japanese pilots and sailors dead or dying. Japan's offensive power in the Pacific cut in half in 5 minutes. The luck involved was insane. McCluskey following that destroyer's wake. Yorktown's group arriving at the exact same moment. All the Zeros being at sea level. The Japanese carriers being caught during rearmament. Timing was perfect. Accidentally perfect, but perfect. If American torpedo bombers hadn't attacked first and pulled Zeros down, those dive bombers would have been swarmed. If McCluskey had turned back 2 minutes earlier, he'd have missed the carriers. If the carriers weren't rearming aircraft, those bomb hits wouldn't have been as catastrophic. Everything went right for America and wrong for Japan in the same 5 minutes. But Hiryu was still out there, and she was about to show that Japan wasn't finished yet. At 10:40 a.m., Hiryu launched 18 Val dive bombers and 6 Zeros towards the American carriers. The Japanese strike leader knew roughly where Yorktown was from scout. Reports: he found her at 12 p.m. Yorktown's radar picked up the incoming raid. Fighters scrambled to intercept. F-4F Wildcats shot down several Vals before they reached the carrier. Anti-aircraft fire from Yorktown and escort ships filled the sky, but 8 Val bombers got through. Yorktown's captain, Elliot Buckmaster, threw the ship into hard turns, trying to dodge. 3 bombs missed, 3 bombs hit. First bomb penetrated the flight deck and exploded inside, killing several men and starting fires. Second bomb went down the smokestack, incredibly unlucky hit, and exploded in the boilers. Yorktown lost power, dead in the water. Third bomb blew through the side and nearly hit the magazines. If it had, Yorktown would have blown apart. Damage control teams went to work, fires got controlled, engineering crews got boilers relit. By 1:40 p.m., Yorktown was making 19 knots and recovering aircraft. She wasn't out of the fight yet, but Hiryu launched a second strike, 10 Kate torpedo bombers plus escorts. They found Yorktown at 2:30 p.m. This time, torpedo bombers came from multiple directions. Yorktown turned into one group, exposing her side to another. 2 torpedoes hit the port side. Massive explosions. Yorktown started listing 26 degrees, way past safe limits. Captain Buckmaster ordered abandon ship. Crew went over the sides. Destroyers picked them up. Everyone thought Yorktown was sinking. But the battle still wasn't done, because now American carriers knew exactly where Hiryu was. She'd been spotted launching those strikes, and Enterprise still had dive bombers ready. At 3:30 p.m., 24 Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise and some from Yorktown that had landed on Enterprise found Hiryu. Same attack pattern, push over from 14,000 feet, dive through anti-aircraft fire. 4 bombs hit Hiryu. Flight deck destroyed, fires spread to the hangars. Same catastrophic damage as the other 3 carriers. By evening, Hiryu was a floating wreck, burning from stem to stern. All 4 Japanese carriers were done. Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the core of Japan's carrier strike force, destroyed in one day. Admiral Yamamoto, on battleship Yamato hundreds of miles away, got the reports and couldn't believe it. 4 carriers lost? Impossible. But it was true. He ordered the remaining Japanese ships to withdraw. The invasion of Midway was cancelled. The battle was over. Well, almost over. June 5th. American ships searched for damaged Japanese vessels. Submarines prowled the area. Japanese ships retreated west. Yorktown was still afloat, barely. Salvage teams went back aboard to try saving her. For a day and a half they worked. Got the list reduced, pumps running. Looked like she might be saved after all. Then, on June the 6th, Japanese submarine I-168 found Yorktown and fired 4 torpedoes. 2 hit Yorktown, 1 hit the destroyer USS Hammond alongside. Hammond sank immediately, taking 80 men with her. Yorktown took more damage, but still didn't sink. She finally went down on June 7th, 4 days after the battle started. She'd taken 3 bombs, 2 aircraft torpedoes, and 2 submarine torpedoes to finally go under. Tough ship. Meanwhile, the 4 Japanese carriers were gone. Akagi and Hiryu had been scuttled by Japanese destroyers after their crews abandoned ship. Kaga sank from uncontrolled fires and flooding. Soryu went down after massive explosions tore her apart. Japan lost about 3,000 men. Pilots, sailors, technicians. America lost 307 men, mostly from Yorktown and the torpedo squadrons. The difference in casualties was huge. More importantly, Japan lost 4 carriers they couldn't quickly replace. America lost 1 carrier but had more building. Essex-class carriers were already under construction, bigger, better, tougher than anything before. Japan's shipyards couldn't keep up, but the real loss for Japan was the pilots. Those experienced carrier pilots killed at Midway, the ones who'd trained for years, fought in China, attacked Pearl Harbor. They were irreplaceable. Japan's training pipeline couldn't produce new pilots fast enough. America's could. After Midway, Japan was on defense. They'd never again have the offensive power to threaten Hawaii or dominate the Pacific. America started island-hopping campaigns, taking back territory piece by piece. Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, Philippines, Iwo Jima, Okinawa. Each battle pushed Japan closer to home. The Battle of Midway wasn't just a tactical victory, it was the strategic turning point of the Pacific War. Before Midway, Japan was winning. After Midway, Japan was losing. The war would last another 3 brutal years, but Japan's best chance at victory died with those 4 carriers. So how did America pull this off? Luck played a huge role. McCluskey finding those carriers, the timing of attacks, Japanese carriers caught rearming. But luck alone doesn't win battles. Intelligence won Midway before the first shot fired. Rochefort's codebreakers gave Nimitz the advantage of knowing when and where Japan would attack. That let America position carriers for an ambush instead of reacting to surprise. American damage control was superior. Yorktown should have sunk at Coral Sea, but got patched up. She took 3 bombs and 2 torpedoes at Midway, and still took 4 days to sink. Japanese carriers took a few bomb hits and burned uncontrollably because their damage control wasn't as good. American industry was ramping up. Japan sank 1 American carrier at Midway. America built 17 more Essex-class carriers during the war, plus dozens of escort carriers. Japan built a handful. You can't win a war of production against America in 1942. And American pilots, even though less experienced, were brave as hell. Those torpedo bomber crews knew they were flying into death traps. TBD Devastators were slow, poorly armed, and the torpedoes barely worked. 41 torpedo bombers went out. Only 6 came back. But they attacked anyway, because the mission mattered more than personal survival. Japan made mistakes too. Splitting their fleet meant no mutual support. Nagumo's hesitation about rearming aircraft, poor patrol coverage, that late-launching scout plane missed the American carriers until too late. Japanese combat air patrol was caught out of position. All these added up. But here's the thing about Midway. It could have gone either way. If Japanese scouts had found American carriers 30 minutes earlier, they might have launched a strike first. If Zeros had been at altitude when American dive bombers arrived, they'd have shot them down. If Japanese damage control had been better, those carriers might have survived. Midway was decided by minutes, by individual decisions made under stress, by chance and skill mixed together. That's what makes it one of the most studied battles in history. So many variables, so many what-ifs. Military academies still teach Midway. The intelligence aspect, the leadership decisions, the courage of the pilots, the importance of timing, all lessons that apply beyond just naval warfare. For Japan, Midway was the beginning of the end. They fought on for 3 more years, but never recovered momentum. American submarines strangled Japanese supply lines. American industry outproduced Japan 10-1. American carriers hunted down the remaining Japanese fleet. By 1945, Japan's navy was essentially destroyed. For America, Midway proved the Pacific War was winnable. After 6 months of defeats and retreats, here was a clear victory. It boosted morale, vindicated carrier tactics, and showed that Japanese forces weren't invincible. And for history, Midway stands as one of the most dramatic come-from-behind victories ever. Underdog America, with broken ships and green pilots defeating Japan's elite carrier force. 4 days that changed the war. 5 minutes that changed those 4 days. Every June 4th, the Navy commemorates the Battle of Midway. There are ceremonies at the Midway Memorial in Hawaii. The few remaining veterans, now in their 90s and 100s, are honored. It's a reminder of what that generation did when everything was on the line. So yeah, the Battle of Midway. America shouldn't have won. But they did, through intelligence, courage, luck and determination. And the world changed because of it. If you want more stories like this, check out the next video on the screen.